fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KTWA 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. Of course, I'm Al Warren, and the boxer is here, Mr. Joe Martino. Joe sounds like more of a boxer name, doesn't it? You know, rather than Dave. Dave is like a thought-out name. Yeah, like you can't be Karate Dave. You can't.
Yeah, I guess not.
Well, you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, like Kung Fu wouldn't have a Dave. Yeah. Right. I mean, so you got to come up with a good name.
Okay.
Joe's a boxer name. So that doesn't
it's true.
Work. You know, you can think of.
I do a little
Joe.
boxing.
Yeah. You just have to work around the midsection. Isn't that what the comments say?
Yeah, that's right. I'm working on it, Al. Are you fat shaming me?
I'm fat shaming you, buddy. No, I couldn't imagine, right? I couldn't imagine why anybody would even say that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just trying to see if he's wearing underwear or not.
Never.
Yeah.
Always commando.
Always commando. Well, he doesn't have to worry about anything falling. This is terrible. What a terrible, what a terrible show you do. Horrible. Anyway, let's not talk about the bad news. Let's just talk about the good stuff.
Yeah.
So now we've got another Australian this week. So this is the week from the down under.
I know,
right? But this guy's different than the last one we had. quite a bit different. I mean, no, I'm not even going to go there. But now he is a horror author. Okay. So he's there to scare people. So Mr. Zachary Ashford is here. So thanks for being here, Zach.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really flattered, so thank you.
We'll see if you say that later.
Well, let's hope so.
Might not like it. Okay, so Zach Ashford, when did you start writing?
Okay, so I think 2018 I sold my first short story, and then by 2020 I had a novella. So I've only had a few novellas, and I think fourth novella is the one that's just come out. I've got a couple of shorter stories through like a novelette, and then a sort of duology of two short stories. And then later this year, I'll have my first novel come out.
You're primarily a short story guy.
It's interesting because I think if you consider a novella a short story, then yes, so far. I tend to sort of beat myself up a little bit for not actually writing too many actual short stories, because I see the submission calls and things, and I think, oh, what do I do with that once I've done it? Put it aside for a collection somewhere. So basically written the novellas has been my primary objective over the last few years, and apart from the one novel I've written. And now I'm trying to write another one. And so getting reasonably far into that. So that's where I see myself. I probably should write more short fiction, because I think it's probably a pretty effective way to get your name out there a little bit more.
The concept, when you're writing horror, in your mind, are you trying to terrify people, or are you more suspenseful, or are you kind of more of a gore horror? Like what would someone get out of one of your stories? Yeah,
so I've been sort of thinking about this, and look, I'm not going to lie, I do love blood and guts. And I love a good story.
You'll like Dave's videos. You should go to his YouTube channel.
Oh, nice. I'll check it out. But yeah, I think it's interesting because I don't think I'm super gory. I think this novella is probably the first time I've actually done something that people would say, oh, you know, that's pretty close to that splatter or extreme side of things. Even when I sort of read fantasy as a teenager, lots of fantasy, I always loved it, you know, where heads were coming off and there were lots of battles and these kinds of really over the top kinds of things, which is hilarious, because listening to you guys talk about, boxers' names and stuff before, I'm just like, man, people who like train for fighting, they scare me because I'm such a teddy bear, you know. But no, I just love that kind of stuff in my horror. And when I'm watching a horror movie and there's some good blood and guts, I'm like, oh, this is great. But I think creature features is probably, I see when, that's probably, I love a good monster in my fiction. And so I try to write with monsters, and I guess maybe even like the blending between how like there's the monstrous and humanity and that kind of thing. So yeah, I've written a dystopian horror. I've written some comedic stuff with the drop bear horror, which they're pretty gory, but it's comedic gore. But this one is the first one that is sort of finishing. Oh, okay, it's pretty nasty, that book, so I'm really waffling. My apologies.
Yeah, no, that's all right. That's all right. We're discovering. We'll figure you out, and then we'll know. We'll send you on your way. We'll figure out what you should be doing next.
Yeah, well, any pointers would be good.
Well, and so you're writing a monster in your horror, and obviously it's traditionally for you not a human, right? It's a creature of some sort.
Yeah, I do love a creature feature.
So where does that come from? Like, and how do you make a monster? Like, I've never done that. Like, I've always written myself stories about people or with people or crime, like there's something going on. When you're writing a monster, I see, because I'm trying to figure this out, because do you write, because the monster's got to do something or scare people, or it's got to represent something bad about humans.
Yeah.
There's got to be some sort of thing. So do you come up with that monster first and then put characters in to deal with the monster, or do you have a story?
Yes and no. Sometimes I have a story. So I'll talk the Morass. Like it's really because the Morass kind of started off as a monster-free story, and it was kind of this really derivative little short story I wrote that was just the trope of the Wolf Creek style murderer in Australia. The Outback highway patrolling guy who takes a backpacker and just does horrible things to them, and it was fun. But and I was like, okay, so why is this guy doing this? And then I was like, oh, what if we could bring in some, he's actually in the liege or service of, some kind of monstrous deity that, actually has these goals, and it's, it's sort of this cosmic monster, and it's wanting him to do something for it, and so that kind of thing. But yeah, I do typically like to think of monsters as being representative of something. Even if I go back to the Soul Survivor books, the Drop Bear books, I think they're really over the top and silly. But what I really wanted to do with those is when you look at things like reality television and the lack of ethics really that comes from the producers and things like that, in terms of they will put these people through anything. They will absolutely position them and represent them as these horrendous people. And then they walk away and just go, cool, yeah, well, there's no mental health support for you. We're not doing any of that. We've just made you look like this. And the suicide rate amongst reality TV stars is like disgustingly large. Even a few years ago, I was having a look, because we were doing, I'm a teacher, we were doing some reality TV studies in class and how they position people. And there was, even at that point a few years ago, there was like something like 32 reality TV people had gone off from the show afterwards and actually committed suicide, which is like horrible. And I know some countries have laws about the services that have to be offered after that now. But I thought to myself, well, imagine if, we could play with some of the genetic engineering aspects of creature features that are fun. And they use these in this reality TV show. So there's that. That sort of commentary there.
We have quite a few people that commit suicide after being on the show.
Well, I hope I'm not one of those. There's just so much to do still. So, yeah.
Well, we tend to bring that out in people, and I'm not sure what we can do about it.
Oh, well, yeah, I don't know. Let's just hope. Fingers crossed.
But yeah, reality TV's never been one. I've never been a fan. I don't care for it. A lot of it's scripted. A lot of people go through.
Yeah.
They're just being used for a object to be, laughed at or.
Yeah.
It's not really my style.
No, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? We'll try and get these people to act in their worst possible way, edit all the bits out of it that make them seem in any way redeemable, and then put them in front of the television, for the whole world to see. So it's an interesting concept, but I get why people watch it as well, that whole trash fire of just, the drama and those things that are there. So, but yeah, no, so coming back to monsters, I do like to use them in a way that they're bigger than just, okay, yeah, there's a monster roaming around. What are we going to do about it? I think that's sort of really one dimensional.
Right.
So I do like to consider what else can be done, with them, how they can be used, and even, just even you take a creature like the shark or the crocodile, you can say a lot about the environment or society or whatever with it. And I think that's just something really, really interesting that we're able to do with monsters. And I just like doing it for that reason. So
yeah, I can see that too, because not only that, when you have a monster and the monster is representing something bad or makes the reader aware of the bad part of humanity, in a sense, that's kind of exciting because you're not really putting that all on a person. It's on a monster. So it's kind of nice. I kind of like this idea.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll write one of these.
Yeah, I find them good fun. And plus you get the whole joy of thinking about, what's my monster capable of, does it have horns or wings or tentacles or whatever it is, so
yeah,
it's always good fun.
Yeah. And so, so the characters that you put in kind of that are up against the creature or the monster of the time or of the book or the story. So those characters, are they people you just don't like in your life that you put into the book, and then they always get beaten by the creature? The creature eats them or electrocutes them or whatever.
No, I tell you what, I don't know if we call it the cringe factor here, but whenever I see people with like those sort of t-shirts and like, I'm a writer, I'll put you in my story, I just like, oh, don't say that. That's so embarrassing. Like, I like to think of interesting characters, and just how people can react. I mean, in the Morass, I've got these two characters with competing goals sort of traveling when they're abducted. And so, one of them is sort of wanting to go and find out, her grandfather passed away and he left this manuscript about how he always loved the country. And she goes out there to sort of, write about essays on what country life is like. And then the other guy, he's in a band, and obviously Outback Australia, the country towns out there, they're pretty dead. There's not a lot going on for a young person. And he wants to play in a band, and he's traveling to the city, and these two kind of meet halfway when they come into trouble, I guess. But in terms of what those characters are doing, I like to just think their own goals and what is it they're trying to achieve, and how do these monstrous elements fit into that, I think is always interesting. And again, it comes, what are we saying about social issues, society, all those sorts of things, and how that can just be represented using something that's out of their control, I guess.
Oh, I was hoping to get some names here of some people that you killed in your book, or tortured. The monster came and beat them and something, and it was like, well, that's my mother. And that's
she was a saint. She was a saint. So I wouldn't do that to mother, but
no,
yeah.
Well, a neighbor or a teacher or something.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, if there are any noisy neighbours in my books, you'll know it's about some guys we used to live next to.
Yeah. See, there you go. Now we're getting it. Now, so the newest story you've got out is called the Morass, and of course I could have fun with that name.
Yeah.
Now, servant of the fly god.
Yes.
Okay. So how does I'm still really interested in that, how that develops. Like, you fly god, servant of the fly god. So this Morass is the servant, right?
Yeah.
Of the god of flies. So where does that come from? Are you like laying in your bedroom and looking at flies? And it's pretty creative is what I'm saying. And I couldn't imagine coming up with it.
I think one of the things that it really comes from is sometimes you go to some of the country towns away from the city, and especially if they're like a cattle town, and you probably experience the same over in the States or in Canada, and there's a lot of flies there. and they're so gross and annoying. But and just like, man, this is one thing that's kind of synonymous with this. I'm out here and it's like I'm walking around, there's like 57 flies on my back. But so I wanted to use some of those sorts of tropes, those sorts of things. And as I said before, this started off as just a pretty kind of reductive, yes, this is an Australian serial killer and he's a Mick Taylor clone. And when I sort of started thinking about, well, what could be done with this? Why could he be doing this? I started to think about some of these ideas around, like people who, I guess, the anti-science, the conspiracy theorists, this kind of stuff that can lead into it. And the idea that we've got some places where meteors have hit in Australia, and that was so long ago, and it's such this old, vast country. And I think one of the things I'm sort of interested in is the folk horror aspects of how people can sort of create their own sort of ideas and things. And so the basic premise of it is this killer, he's basically become devoted to this creature he's been told lives in the morass or the swamp at the back of his house. And it came down with a meteor centuries ago, and it's just been there sort of waiting for an opportunity to make its next move on Earth. And fortunately, it now has someone who can deliver what it needs. And this guy, Calvin Pastroni, the chief antagonist in the book, he's happy to work for it. And it's sort of one of the ways it has sort of corrupted the environment around it over time is by taking some of those flies and using them as a hive mind kind of way of surveilling and talking to things. And so they're able to sort of communicate in a way that they become an extension of the monster, that he treats them like pets and he sort of breeds them and collects them. And, so he uses these things and then his own sort of predilections for torture and murder. He uses them to create a lot of body horror. And that idea for me definitely came from, I don't know if you've ever heard of the YouTuber Aussie Man Reviews.
No, I don't.
He's kind of like this guy. He just commentates videos and puts a really thick Australian accent on and makes them quite amusing and uses a lot of vernacular and colloquialism. But I used to write the blog posts for him, and the guys who every now and then they'd send through some of those videos, the meiosis videos where you'd see someone is infected, with a bot fly, or they've just got tons of like maggots in their teeth. And I'd be like, can you stop sending me these videos? Because they gross me out. I just do not like them. And they're just like, no, I felt like they sent me more after that because that's what blokes do.
Yeah,
right?
I was waiting for that.
And so, yeah, and I would just watch them just being, this is just the most horrific thing I've ever seen. How can I use it in the book? And so I sort of twisted all that in and so the characters are being pretty much brutalized by the antagonist at this point. He wants to, in his words, prepare them for their sacrifice to this fly god that he's got out in the swamp is how he sees it. Yeah, so that's where they came from. And it's pretty gross. It's pretty gruesome. So,
Do you take a lot of hallucinogenics?
No, not at all. Yeah, it's quite really interesting. I was saying to David before, I'm actually a classroom teacher, and so I'm pretty straight. I'm a real family man. So it's kind of funny because sometimes the kids are in class, like, can we read your book? And I'm like, not that one. Not that one either. And like I sort of said to the publisher Crystal Lake, I was like, look, just when you put this on Amazon, just definitely mark it as adult horror. So that, there's no mistake if some parent sends an email like, oh my God, we read your book and it's not okay. Like, well, your child is 11. Why are they reading adult horror? So.
Yeah. You should have had a different name. You should have called yourself Dave Ashford or something.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, do you worry about writing horror when as a school teacher?
No, it's never ever been a problem. I mean, I've been teaching. I think most people are just genuinely a bit excited about it, and even for parents to be able to say, "Oh, my kid's teacher's a writer," it's nice. I think parents enjoy that, and the kids where I am, I'm at such a good school, such an academic school, where it's kind of a selective entry school, so it's a real point for the kids to be like, "Oh, yeah, this is great," and it's like. Does it actually translate to what we're doing with curriculum? Maybe not necessarily, but it's a great point for them to consider. So, yeah.
Are you the type of writer that when you're sitting down doing this story, for instance, are you seeing the action happen in your mind? Does it play like a movie? Do you hear characters? When you're writing the dialogue, does it come across as real, like a real story then that way? Or are you completely just a technical writer that just does it on the paper? Like how is your process in writing a story like this?
Yeah, great question. I guess my process is realistically a lot of planning. I like dialogue to sound natural, so there's a lot of speaking dialogue out or reading to my wife. Whether she wants to or not, whether she's listening, I'll just read with the expression on it. But to come back, I'm a big fan of just plotting it all out on a story curve or a Freytag's pyramid map and just actually putting it all together and making sure that it makes sense sequentially and there's tension in there. And what I'll do though, when I first plot that is a lot of the nitty gritty won't be there, but the big set pieces will be. So I'll know that in something I'm writing, I want this scene to happen because it's big and dynamic and I want this cool scene. And I really think about what would look amazing in, in some sort of visual. I'm really picturing, I'm quite a visual person. So yeah, what does it look like? And, how does that come together? And then as I'm writing, I'll probably, my first few drafts won't even be complete. They'll just be having a go at getting things out, getting the characters down, and maybe writing some of these pieces. And then I sort of always want to look back and sort of say, well, okay, well, how did I get here? Like, this is all well and good to say this looks really rad, and good, but I can't just have random things happen. There's got to be a sequence. And then that's where it comes into, what are the characters' goals, how they ended up here, all these sorts of things. So it's really interesting. I think when you start getting in, you go, okay, well, that doesn't work. I've got to redo that, those sort of things. So that's the process, would be to draw it out. I take notes on characters and experiment with it. And even the first couple of readings, this is a bit one-dimensional. How do I add more? How do I show, not tell something, as opposed to just know it in my head, if that makes sense?
Since you plot, I'm wondering, do your characters surprise you? Do they kind of pull the story off the rails a little bit, pull the plot out so that, you end up in a spot where you're like, how did I get here? And how do I get out of this?
Yeah, for sure. There's sometimes, you'll write something and you'll be like, I'm really done. I've got 2,000 words down today. You'll be feeling really good about yourself. And then when you go back and look at it later, you're like, well, why has this happened? Why have I written in here that this character did this? And it's because, maybe I was being lazy in trying to bridge a gap somewhere. And that's when I've got to go back and flesh those things out. So that's the negative side of it. But I think the really positive side of it is, we actually had another author come and do a talk for the children running a picture book. She's written like 80 books for kids, and really talented lady, Josie Montano, came to our school, and she was talking about how she actually interviewed her characters. And I was in a scene the other day, writing a scene. I knew what I wanted to do with a character, and it just wasn't sort of happening. It all felt really contrived. But then by having them have a discussion with someone who's a mentor to them, that was kind of, interrogating the character, it sort of came out the way I wanted it to. So there's that positive side of actually just writing this through within the framework, writing this idea in a way that was free written, actually helped unplug that kind of subconscious block, I think. Because I really keep goals in mind when I'm writing for my characters. And I think that's the key to tension. What are they trying to achieve? What's stopping them? And even if it's simplistic at times, I just think that's the key to turning pages.
Well, yeah. And the whole concept of it. Do you actually create, like, the cover? When you get a cover, like, of your newest book, is it you that created that cover, or the idea of it with someone, or like, how does that come about?
This one, I was really, really lucky. It was Ben Baldwin, who is just an incredible cover designer. I think he won a World Fantasy Award or British Fantasy Award a couple of years ago for one of his covers. And I'm lucky enough that one of my previous books, when the cicadas stopped singing, or cicadas, as you guys say over there, stopped singing, he designed that. And when Joe at Crystal Lake said, we can get Ben Baldwin on this for you. You've worked with him before. Ben actually came and said, I really loved the last book. I read this one too, and I've got some great ideas. What do you want? And I sort of gave him this brief idea. I have this idea of the monster coming out of the water, the characters in the foreground, but I am not a visually capable artist. I'm the kind of guy who'll draw a frog and someone's like, what is that blob? So...
Yeah.
I was able to sort of just send him an email saying, I think this, but I don't know if it would work. Would it work? And he's like, give me a couple of days to play with it. And he comes back and he's like, what do you think of this? And I'm just like, dude, like, this is incredible. Just basically go nuts. The thing I did sort of put forward was I wanted to be able to sit next to the previous one at a convention table, these are these books. And because they're both very much set in Queensland, which is where I live. And I really like the idea of keeping that theme going, and the covers, they have their similarities in the way there's like, the tree line and the composition of them, but the colors are so contrasting. It looks really, really interesting when you put them together. So
yeah, and that gives us a really good representation of what Queensland looks like.
Yeah, monsters and lizard people. That's
yeah. I was just like, well, that's really good. You should send these book covers to the marketing of Queensland, like when they're out trying to get tourists around the world.
Yeah, you've heard about our spiders. Now have a look at this thing.
Yeah. Come to Queensland.
Yeah.
I could see it now.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll work. What was it? Way better than throwing a shrimp on the barbie, right? Was it Paul Hogan before he was a tax dodger? That was the thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, they're frying it right in front of the swamp, and the big creature eats them.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, can I have some?
What would? Yeah.
You need a big knife.
Yeah. Yeah. Now we're getting somewhere. Now we're getting a real thing going on here. See, make some money on the side. What makes a good story for you? What is it that keeps you, or what is it that you find in a story that kind of goes, wow, I like this, and you kind of will even read it again?
Like any story, no matter the genre, it's the people, isn't it? You know, what's the emotional resonance? What's gripping about what's happening to them? Even if it's not something I can relate to on a personal level, just this idea that human beings are experiencing this conflict and the way we sort of get involved with that and the dramas of that. You know, I think that's what makes it look good for me. I mean, I think we've all read books that are just sort of set pieces and action. Well, we don't really care too much about the characters, and they're just mindless fun, and there's a place for that. But something that I'm going to walk away from going, yeah, that was actually quite powerful in terms of the way it elicited that emotive response from me. It's always about the people involved and why this matters to them, you know. So that kind of.
Have you written a character in the past that stays with you today, like that you find intriguing, like one of your favorite characters, let's say, in all of the stories you've written? Is there one that kind of sticks out for you?
Yeah, I think definitely, and it's probably got a lot to do with the way it's a single perspective story, but Cora in When the Cicadas Stop Singing, I think she's this really interesting, complex character because she's living out in the hinterland as she's surviving, you know, this post-apocalyptic world. And one of the things that she's become attached to this place. She's buried her son there who's died, and she doesn't want to leave. So the main conflict of the story is not the lizard monsters themselves, it's the people who come and try to take this secure kind of base from her. So it sort of plays it like a home invasion, but it's that why didn't you just run away? What do you have to let go of? And what does it mean to actually process grief? And I think that subconsciously I was working through some things that in my life when I was running around that time were there. My mum had recently passed, and then there were some family things going on where I wasn't seeing people anymore. And it was this exercise in being, okay, well, I want to stick with this, but I have to move on. And so her fighting for her right to stay, and then perhaps realizing that maybe she did have other options after all, or even if she did fight and win that battle, maybe staying wasn't the best thing. And I think that is quite resonant in, here comes my cat. I'm quite resonant in just being a character that sticks with me there. I think that was really important. And then, yeah, I don't know, it's those things that I didn't think I'm going to work this stuff out. But when I read it back and sort of had to put some stuff together, because it was nominated for the Aurealis here in Australia, and I had to think, oh God, if I have to go and stand there afterwards, and I didn't fortunately have to explain anything to anyone, so the book just gets on its own. Yeah, to think about what was going on in my head when I wrote that, and I think that's a really interesting way to look back at it. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
You kind of look like her on the cover too.
Yeah, I know, right? I've got these long locks of hair and, you know, clean shaven. The way I hold an axe is pretty tough too. So yeah.
Well, I thought isn't that how you go to school?
Yeah, that's right.
You know, teacher. Oh, here he comes.
Yeah. What's he going to teach us?
Mr. Ashford always carries an axe.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, no, and that's kind of one question I ask, because it seems like, and even in myself, you know, when you talk to writers, quite often each time they go through a project, write a story, and it gets published, and they finish and they move on. That process of that story, such as the cicadas stop singing when they stop singing that book, so that the writing of that story actually changed you somewhat. And I always ask what it does or how it changes you. And that one you kind of talked about. How about the new one? Did you notice any changes in in who you are, even as a writer, now that it's complete?
Probably not so much. I mean, I think in the way that this was put together as a novella, I finished it after I had finished writing the novel I'd written, which definitely was a big exercise. And I kind of wanted a bit of a palate cleanser in this one as well. So just what can horror be in terms of what I can write, and how horrific can I actually make it? There were these kind of things here. But in terms of a big personal character arc, I guess, probably not so much. I think it let me process a few things about like traveling, because there's these kinds of elements of things, but I don't know. I don't think so. Not this one so much. It's more of a traditional balls to the wall horror story. And yeah, like I think even editing back when I had to read it again, and I got to the end of this one, I went, oh man, that's really kind of breathless by the end. It's this relentless sort of horror as opposed to the character arc. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but yeah.
Yeah, it does. But, I wonder, when you were doing this, you were probably writing this over the pandemic, I would imagine.
Yeah, it would have been, was it?
And so do you think that's sort of partially the reason you wanted it as well? Not only a palate cleanser, but just letting aggression out, and also with all the weird stuff going on.
Yeah, I think
anti-vaxxers and all that.
That's a really good insight. I think to an extent, when I was finishing both of these books, and they're both pretty bleak, the books coming out this year, I was in a pretty angry kind of place, just with various things that are going on in your personal life, and I'm not like, oh, woe is me kind of thing, but just some bits and pieces that are happening, and a bit of turmoil in other places, with family members and things like that. And to be able to sort of be like, okay, well, geez, I'm pissed off this year. And I look at this book like, it's quite visceral. So maybe it was about just processing some of those darker emotions, and whether it was a case of actually being cognizant of what they mean subjectively, or whether it was just a case of, no, you're just in a grumpy phase and this book reflects that. I don't know.
Well, I know if I was writing it, the people getting killed by the monster would be like the anti-vaxxers. But that's me.
Yeah, it's more interesting that I think, that was top of my mind through a lot of the time, is the whole anti-vax kind of movement and how it's doing harm. And I guess there is that to it, because it is, the character Calvin Pastroni is very much a conspiracy theorist. Like one of the lines he sort of says in the books, we have the CSIRO over here. Well, we did until politicians decided science doesn't matter. And they sort of, were funded. And one of the things he says is when he's saying to these characters, before he abducts them, look, I'm going to show you the meteors. I'm going to show you the meteors. And the guys are like, that's bull.
Oh my.
There's no meteors. It's literally just a myth. Right. And it's just volcanic activity that's left these caves and swamps and things here. He's like, oh, you don't believe those science wankers, do you? And so there is that element. And then I'm kind of often really thinking about the ways religion can be used for negative purposes. And I think we see this a lot. And I don't actually think they're the religious people who are making these things where it's, look, we're going to go out and actively kind of be harmful because we think it's good. I think they're people who are taking advantage of religion to meet their own agendas. And I think people who actually really are faithful in what they believe are not thinking along these lines. But I think it's very easy to manipulate that and say, well, I've got money and power and I'm doing this in the name of this and you should join me. I think that's a pretty seductive message for a lot of people, because it appeals to our kind of baser attributes. I think there's an element of that coming through in Pastroni and the Fly God. They talk about wanting to cleanse the earth of sinners a little bit. So I think there's definitely some of that subconscious aspect coming through. So maybe that's something I was kind of frustrated about through COVID, now that I'm a bit more thinking about it on a deeper level. So thanks for asking me that, actually.
Yeah, I always think on those terms. Usually you can find the source, in that way. Because you might not plan any sort of a meaning or subtext in the beginning, but it sort of comes out organically when you're writing.
Yeah, I agree
completely.
When
you're putting the story together, it sort of just works out, and then you can look back at it and you can be editing or redoing it, and you realize there's more to it than just a simple monster killing people.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Yeah.
If you ever read any of Dave's books, yeah.
I have to do it, actually. I always make a point of doing that.
So where are you what do you plan to do with your writing world? Have you had any thoughts about what you want to do and where you want to see it go?
I think, look, I kind of think of this as a hobby. There's a part of me that I would love to find ways to angle this passion I have for writing into career aspects, but I don't think the reality is that you can just sell books and do that. I think you have to be involved in teaching and workshops and editing and those kind of things as well to realistically take it to a place where you can call it a career, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think I'd like to, over the next, 18 months or so, do some further study. I know I've got some access to where I studied. Some of the professors there would be happy to take me on board to do some things there. I'd love to do that because that's an opportunity we're afforded here in Australia. And then use that, for tutoring and further studies. But really, I think what I want is I just want people to read my books and enjoy them, and that's pretty much it. Like obviously we would all love to have movies made and make millions of dollars, but I think the reality is you have to be kind of a bit pragmatic in how you think about those things.
Right.
And I think for me, just to be recognised as this is of a reasonably good quality, and he's not just wasting his time. He's writing good stuff, and people who enjoy horror can read it and go, yeah, this is good horror, if that makes sense. So it's about quality within that niche field. I'd love to perhaps look at how I could bring in some of the young adult middle grade approaches to fiction and do some horror with that. I think that's an area that is ripe for exploration. Because when you give kids in class a story, even something like The Monkey's Paw, they just love it. And not too many of the books we present them with as educators are of that nature. But when you give them those stories, they're firmly engrossed in them, and they love, series and things like that. So I'd love to do something like that. How? Yeah, it's not really crossed my mind yet. Yeah, I think that. So that really, I just like
speak with the right people and. Speak with the right people.
Well, if you know anyone. Yeah.
That's how I get anywhere.
Always got to brush those knees off.
Oh, they're just permanent. I got permanent braces on them.
I was just wondering, we have a robust horror community here in the States. What about Australia?
Oh,
do you have a horror community there as well?
Yeah, it's amazing how strong it is. I think when you think about it on a population-based level compared to a big place like the States, I think we've got 27 million, something like that, maybe 30 million. I'm not sure exactly what the figures are. And the first time I went down to a convention in Canberra, it was for the Aurealis, and you walk into this room and there's Karen Warren, Aaron Dries, Alan Baxter, Garth Nix, all these like name authors, and you're like, oh my God, they're all like here in Australia. And it's like, Jean Flynn lives up the road and she's won, how many Stokers, and, and that pool of really high quality authors, all being here, I think is pretty interesting, because it's not something I really thought about before. We all mention, we know authors from our country and these kind of things, but when you're actually seeing them all there together, you're like, oh, this is actually a bit of a powerhouse room. In terms of who's there, and I think we punch way above our weight here in Australia when it comes to horror fiction.
So now let's see. Now, are you active on social media? Do you like readers and people to find you on different places? Do you have a website?
Yeah.
Where do people find Zachary? Like hanging out at a bar? Like what's going on? Where?
With any luck. No, I guess. Social media. Social media is tricky to say where to start these days because it's just fragmenting and exploding, and who knows what's going on. I guess the first easy starting point is the website, Zachary-Ashford.com. Will take you there. I need to update it, to be honest, but as much as I hate to say it, Twitter is probably still where I have the most followers, and I can reach the most people. And once you hit there, it can drive you to the other places. I do get involved in, Facebook groups like the Books of Horror group on Facebook, which is this really awesome. It's like the best thing on Facebook, I think, these days. You know, you see so many recommendations for great horror books and things on there. I think it's really, you know, great to have that on there. So I try and participate in that as much as I can. Twitter's probably the easiest point to then go, right, you know, this is publicly available. Here it is. And then, you know, there's links on there to everywhere else is probably the easiest thing to say.
Well, you got to get on TikTok.
Oh, yeah. I nothing makes me feel my age like TikTok. And it's not even the videos.
Yeah.
I was talking to someone the other day, and like, I said, can you share this post? And I'm just like, totally a boomer. Like, how do I share a TikTok? You know, is there a verb for sharing a TikTok? I don't know. Like, you retweet something on Twitter, but doesn't it just send it to everyone's message?
Well, that's X now.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's X.
Oh,
Not
God.
Twitter, it's X. Yeah.
As any 14-year-old would name their website. But...
Yeah. It's kind of been done before.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
It's it is what it's saying. I meant X, not Twitter. Yeah. Oh, God, you just feel like a loser saying it, don't you? Could you imagine walking into that meeting with your shareholders and being like, all right, guys, so I've got this great idea. And they're like, I don't know, I guess in this context, they'd probably be like, what now? But yeah, I could just imagine the faces. And he's like, big grin, how good is this idea? And they're like, oh, it's great, Elon, it's great.
It's excellent.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I am on there. I do have
a
an
lot of
Instagram.
writers left there.
Yeah, Twitter's a strange place, or X is a strange place these days compared to what it was a year ago.
Well, we really appreciate you being on the show, and it's been interesting. It's good talk with you. Now, of course, your latest story is called The Morass, and it's the servant of the fly god, and it's Zachary Ashford. You know, he's the author here, and thank you for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. It's a really, great start to the weekend. I feel productive and flattering. So thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Zachary.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Yeah. Good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.